the great hall of Vordenmoor had never been more alive. 43 wolves from 9 territories sat around a table carved from a single ancient oak. Silver sconces lined the stone walls, each one burning with the blue-white flame that the old packs lit only during formal courts. The kind of gathering that happened once every 3 years, when alpha kings and border lords came together to speak of alliances, bloodlines, and the shifting politics of the wolf world. The air smelled of smoked venison, pine resin, and the unmistakable charge of wolves trying to behave like civilized people while every instinct they carried whispered otherwise. Azira Fawkes stood near the far end of the preparation corridor, just outside the arched doorway that opened into the hall. She had been standing there for 4 minutes, pressing her palms flat against the skirt of her stone-gray dress, breathing in the way she had trained herself to breathe whenever the weight of a room threatened to collapse on her chest. She was not nervous. She had stopped being nervous at events like this 2 years ago, when she realized that no one in that room was ever really looking at her anyway. What she felt now was something harder to name. A low, settled heaviness in the center of her chest, like a stone she had swallowed and never quite been able to digest. She had spent 11 days preparing for this gathering. Not the food, the kitchen staff managed that. Not the seating arrangement, though she had quietly revised it 3 times after reviewing the last 2 years of political correspondence between the attending packs. Not the decorations, though she had personally replaced the red floral arrangements that the steward had ordered, knowing that red was the mourning color of the Caldrath territory, and that seating their new Alpha Lord beside a table of red flowers would read as either a threat or an insult, neither of which Vordenmoor could afford right now. She had managed every thread of this gathering with the invisible precision that had become her full existence. She knew that Lord Haveth of the Eastern Reaches could not sit within 20 feet of Beta Commander Roran Aldgate, without the old boundary resentment surfacing in the way their wolves communicated. Not in words, but in the angle of their shoulders, the pace of their breathing, the barely perceptible flattening of their ears that any trained wolf would recognize as territorial challenge. She had placed them on opposite ends of the table. She knew that the Caldrath delegation had traveled for 3 days through wet forest and needed warm broth before wine, not the reverse, so she had adjusted the service order. She knew that the youngest member of the Northern Court, a newly elevated alpha named Brindy Solving, was attending her first formal Interpack court and was terrified of getting the ritual greetings wrong. So Azira had quietly sent the girl a handwritten note 3 days ago with every greeting, its proper response, and the specific order in which to deliver them. She had thought of everything. And the man at the head of that table, the man who wore the Vordenmoor sigil ring on his right hand, whose voice carried the resonance that made every wolf in a room instinctively straighten, had not thought of her at all. Alpha King Saras Fawkes, her mate, bonded to her by the moon goddess herself, in a ceremony that had shaken the ground beneath both of their feet when the bond snapped into place. The man who had looked at her 3 years ago like she was the only fixed point in a world that never stopped moving. He had not looked at her like that in 14 months. She pushed off the wall, smoothed her dress, and walked into the hall. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Not obviously, not in a way that any human would have noticed, but wolves felt it. Several pairs of eyes tracked her instinctively, because wolves always tracked movement, and because something in the frequency of the room changed slightly when a Luna entered a space, the way a chord changes when a new note is added to it. Saras was mid-sentence with Lord Haveth, laughing about something, relaxed in the way that public performances of alpha power required him to be relaxed. He glanced up when she entered. For one breath, one single breath, his eyes found her face. Then they moved on. She took her seat to his right, the Luna's chair, the one with the carved crescent on the backrest that 7 generations of Vordenmoor Lunas had sat in. She arranged her napkin, reached for her water glass, and let her gaze move around the table with calm, practiced ease. 3 seats to the left of Saras, a man she did not recognize had been watching her since she entered. He was lean, sharp-jawed with pale gray eyes that held the particular quality of stillness that only came from years of training a wolf to be completely unreadable. His name was Edric Salmond, head of the Interpack Council's neutral delegation, a man who answered to no single alpha and therefore feared none. He had arrived that afternoon from the capital. Azira had reviewed his file. She knew he was here to evaluate the political health of Vordenmoor's court. She would think about that later. The dinner progressed through its first and second courses. Wine was poured. Conversations multiplied. Saras held court at his end of the table with the natural authority that had always been his most undeniable quality, the ability to make every person in a room feel that they were the most important one in it. It was the gift that had made her love him. It was the same gift that had, somewhere in the last 2 years, stopped being directed at her at all. It was during the formal introductions, the ritual moment in every Interpack gathering when the Alpha King presented his inner circle, that it happened. "Lord Salmond," Saras said, his voice carrying down the table with easy command. "I should introduce the people closest to me. My Beta Commander Hades Vane, who most of you already know. My War Chief Brandys Tor. My Council Head Elder Thessaly." He moved down the list. Names, ranks, brief descriptions of each person's role and standing, each one delivered with the particular warmth of a man who valued and saw his people. Then he glanced to his right. Azira felt the look before she processed it, the brief flicker of his gaze, the slight pause, the almost imperceptible hesitation of a man who was about to say something and realized in the last moment that he wasn't sure exactly what to say. "And to my right," Saras said, his tone not unkind, not cruel, simply absent in the way that things are absent when a man's mind is somewhere else entirely, "is nobody particularly important. Someone who helps keep things running around here." The silence that followed was the kind that is weight. Not the comfortable silence of people processing new information, not the brief quiet between one exchange and the next. This was the specific, electric silence of 43 wolves who had just watched something happen that was not supposed to happen, something that violated the most basic architecture of how Alpha Courts worked, something that every wolf in that room recognized as wrong in their bones before their minds had even finished forming the thought. The Luna of Vordenmoor, introduced as nobody important. 43 pairs of eyes found Azira's face. Her wolf slammed against the inside of her chest like a fist, the raw animal outrage of a creature that had just been publicly denied. Her blood ran hot and then cold in the span of 2 seconds. She felt her fingers tighten around the stem of her wine glass, not enough to break it, but enough that she had to consciously, deliberately relax them one by one. She did not let her eyes flash. She did not let her jaw tighten. She did not reach for the public anger that would have been her right, that every wolf at that table would have understood and respected. Instead, she looked at Lord Edric Salmond, who was watching her with those pale gray eyes, and she smiled. Not the smile of someone who had been embarrassed and was pretending otherwise. Not the performance of a woman holding herself together at the edges. It was something far quieter and far more final than that. The smile of someone who has just received the last piece of information they needed to make a decision they had been putting off for a very long time. She turned her head back to her plate. She took one unhurried sip of her wine. She set it down with perfect care. And she made her choice. She had not always been invisible. There was a version of Azira Fox, born Azira Arin, out of the Thornwood pack in the Middle Territories, who had been seen so completely by one person that she had sometimes wondered if she was too visible, if the way he looked at her would eventually burn something away. She had been 24 when she met Saras, not a highborn wolf, not the daughter of an alpha or the niece of a border lord. She was a mid-ranking pack wolf with sharp instincts, a gift for reading people that bordered on unnerving, and a small, carefully built life in Thornwood that she loved with the quiet fierceness of someone who had made it entirely on her own. The mate bond found them at a boundary summit. Saras had walked into the meeting hall of the neutral grounds at Ashthorn, and across the room, without warning, without preamble, without any of the gradual emotional building that her mother had told her the bond sometimes allowed, It simply snapped into place. Like a lock and a key that had existed separately for years, and had just been pressed together for the first time. She had actually stepped backward. One step. Just one, because her body needed to register the magnitude of what had just happened before her legs would cooperate again. Saras had gone perfectly still on the other side of the room. She remembered that. The absolute stillness of him. An alpha king, one of the most powerful wolves in the territories, standing completely motionless with his mouth slightly open, and something in his expression that was not the controlled authority he wore in public. Something raw and young and almost frightened in its openness. He had crossed the room in 12 steps. "You," he had said, the single word carrying the whole weight of a man who had just had the floor of his world shift beneath him. "Me," she had replied, because what else was there to say when the moon goddess had already said everything? The first year had been the truest thing she had ever lived. He had moved her to Vordenmoor within 6 weeks, mating ceremony completed beneath a full moon with both their packs bearing witness. She had left everything she knew, her position as Thornwood's record keeper and pack historian, her cabin at the edge of the silver birch forest, the friends who had known her since she was a pup learning her first shift, and she had gone to him with both hands open, because the bond told her she was supposed to be there, and her heart confirmed everything the bond said. The first year, Saras had learned her, deliberately, carefully, the way a wolf learns terrain they intend to call home. He had memorized the way she took her morning tea, plain, no honey, brewed stronger than anyone else in the pack house could tolerate. He had noticed that she needed 1 hour of silence each morning before she could be fully present to the world, and he had protected that hour without being asked. He had sat with her on late evenings when she reviewed pack correspondence, and asked questions, not because he needed the information, but because he wanted to know what she thought, how her mind moved through a problem, what she saw in the spaces between the official reports that everyone else missed. He had laughed with her in those first months, really laughed, not the performed ease of a public alpha, but the unguarded, helpless laughter of a man who found someone genuinely funny in a way that surprised him. She had a dry, observational humor, the kind that required you to be paying close attention or you would miss it entirely, and Saras had always paid close attention. Then, somewhere in the middle of the second year, he had stopped paying attention. She could not point to the exact moment. That was the nature of this particular kind of fatting. It had no single cause, no identifiable wound, no incident she could examine and say, "Here, this is where it began." It was more like watching a fire burn down, not because someone extinguished it, but simply because no one added more wood. He had stopped asking what she thought during strategy meetings, not excluded her, simply stopped directing questions toward her, the way you stop noticing a lamp in the corner of a room. He had stopped saving her the particular quiet of early mornings, allowing pack business to intrude before she'd had her hour, and when she'd mentioned it once, gently, he'd looked at her with a slight frown that said the information was reaching him from very far away. The coffee she brought him each morning, black, 2 portions of ground pine bark mixed in, exactly the way his mother had made it when he was young, and which no one else in the pack house knew to prepare. He accepted without looking up from whatever document held his attention. She had begun, quietly and without announcement, to absorb more of the pack's invisible labor. She managed the social architecture of Vordenmoor with the same meticulous care that the war chief managed the pack's defensive perimeter, but with none of the recognition, because the work she did was the kind that only became visible when it was not done. She prevented conflicts before they started. She remembered the things that kept wolves feeling seen and therefore loyal. She held the emotional center of the pack together with threads so fine that most of the people she helped never knew they were being helped at all. Old Meister Edwin, the pack's eldest wolf, had been losing his hearing for 2 years and had not told anyone because he was ashamed of it, and because he feared being seen as diminished. Azira had rearranged the way information was delivered in council meetings without explanation, ensuring that Edwin always received written briefs before anyone spoke, so he could follow every discussion without strain. She had done this so smoothly that Edwin himself wasn't entirely sure it had been intentional. Young Sale Torin, 16 years old and recently through his first shift, a brutal, late-arriving shift that had left him feeling like an outsider among the pack's juveniles, had been struggling with the particular loneliness of being different in a world that valued uniformity. Azira had quietly arranged for him to begin assisting the pack's archive keeper, a role that happened to require the specific kind of careful, detailed thinking that Sale excelled at, and that the other juveniles couldn't be bothered with. She had given him a place where being different was the qualification. She had done hundreds of things like this. Hundreds of small, precise acts of care that kept Vordenmore's social fabric from fraying at the seams. And Saris, good, intelligent, genuinely not a cruel man, had noticed none of it, because good men can be blind in the specific way that people are blind to things they have begun to take for granted. She had written to her mother about it once. Her mother, who had been dead for 6 years, which meant the letter had gone into the fire unread, but writing it had been the only way to put the feeling somewhere outside her own body. He does not see me anymore, she had written, and the strange thing is that I am not sure he knows this about himself. I think he looks in my direction and sees the Luna, the function, the role. I don't think he sees me. I'm not sure he remembers that those are two different things. She had folded the letter, held it over the candle flame, and watched it go. And she had stayed, because the bond was still there, quieter than it had been, less warm in the places it used to glow brightest but present. And because she had chosen to believe, that the man who had crossed a room in 12 steps to reach her was still inside the Alpha King somewhere, and that if she waited long enough, he would find his way back. She had believed that for 2 years. And then he had introduced her to 43 wolves as nobody important. There is a particular kind of leaving that happens without drama. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no final confrontation designed to produce the acknowledgement that was always just out of reach. This kind of leaving is quieter and in many ways more final, because it requires the person leaving to have completely surrendered the hope that the situation will change. Drama requires hope. The hope that if you just say the right thing, make the right scene, produce the right reaction, something will shift. Azira had spent the last year slowly, without realizing it, running out of that particular hope. By the time she excused herself from the dinner, she was empty of it entirely. She rose from the Luna's chair with the unhurried grace that 3 years of formal pack gatherings had built into her body. She touched the side of her wine glass lightly, a gesture so small that only someone watching for it would have noticed. She murmured a brief, pleasant word to the beta's mate beside her and turned toward the doorway. She did not look at Saris. Behind her, she heard the dinner's conversation resume, patching over the moment the way water fills a hole, quickly, instinctively, because the social organism of 43 wolves needed to maintain its surface tension. She did not rush. The corridor outside the great hall was cool and high-ceilinged, lit by hanging iron lanterns that cast the old stone walls in amber. She walked its length without stopping, turned left at the portrait gallery, 7 generations of Vordenmore's Alpha Kings starring from their frames with the particular expression that painted wolves always seemed to wear, as if they had seen something coming that they refused to name, and climbed the east stairs to the upper residential floor. The Luna's chambers occupied the corner of the east wing, large enough to feel like a statement about status, furnished with the accumulated weight of pack tradition, the carved headboard, the tapestry above the fireplace showing Vordenmore's founding wolves mid-shift beneath a full moon, the writing desk that had belonged to 3 Lunas before her. She had made it her own in small ways. The sea-green curtains she had brought from her old room in Thornwood. The shelf of annotated pack histories and territorial maps that she had assembled over 3 years and that contained, she was fairly certain, more operational knowledge about Vordenmore than any single document in the pack's formal archive. The dried herbs hanging from the window latch, silver fern and moonbloom, which her grandmother had always dried above windows, because she believed they cleared a space of old arguments. Azira stood in the doorway of this room for 1 full minute. Then she moved with the efficiency of someone who had already, somewhere deeper than conscious thought, decided exactly what she was doing. She packed one bag, not the ceremonial trunk, not the formal clothes that belonged to the role of Luna rather than to her, not the silver jewelry that marked her status or the official wolf seal ring that she had been given at the mating ceremony. Those things belonged to Vordenmore. She left them on the dressing table in a neat line, the seal ring placed precisely at the center, as if she were returning something that had been lent to her. What she took, the sea green curtains, folded, her annotated maps and histories, 3 years of her own thinking, which belonged to no one but her, a small carved wolfwood box her father had given her when she was 8, which she had never been able to leave behind anywhere because some things are too old and too close to the bone to be left, the dried herbs from the window latch, 3 changes of clothes, her mother's silver bracelet, which she wore always on her left wrist and which had never been a Luna's belonging, only a daughter's. She had counted the silver before she left, the personal allowance that Vordenmore custom provided to the Luna, which she had spent almost nothing of over 3 years, because what she had needed more than things was time, and time could not be bought. She had enough to move, to establish herself somewhere, to have options. It was not a great deal. It was enough. She descended by the servant stairs, which she knew better than the main staircase because she had used them more often. Easier to manage the invisible work of the pack from the back corridors than from the public hallways where every interaction required performance. In the kitchen, the morning bread was already set to prove, the covered bowls lined up on the wooden shelf that caught the residual heat from the banked oven. The kitchen boy, 14-year-old Fett, was asleep at the side table where he'd clearly lost his battle with the late hour. She almost touched his shoulder. She stopped herself. Waking him would require explanation, and she had no explanation that would make sense to a 14-year-old or to anyone else who would hear it second-hand. She slipped out the side door into the herb garden. The night air hit her face, cool and carrying the deep forest scent of the territory beyond the pack house walls, pine and damp earth, and the particular wildness that lived just past the boundary of cultivated ground. Her wolf stirred in her chest, not with the desperate urgency she had half expected, but with something that felt almost like relief, like an animal that has been kept in a comfortable room for too long and has just been allowed to remember that rooms are not the whole world. At the garden gate she paused. A figure sat on the old stone bench near the rosemary hedge, straight back despite the late hour, a wool blanket over her shoulders. Elder Thessaly, the pack council's oldest voice, 73 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness in her face that comes not from emptiness but from depth. She had been a Luna herself once, 30 years ago, before her mate had died in the border wars, and she had redirected everything she had into the pack's governance instead. Their eyes met. Azira held her breath. Thessaly looked at her for a long moment, not with alarm, not with the expression of someone who was about to call for the guards or summon the Alpha or prevent what was clearly happening. She looked at Azira the way a woman looks at another woman when she understands something completely and does not need it explained. "The northern road is faster," the old elder said, her voice low, carrying no further than between the two of them. "But the forest path is safer. No pack traffic after the 3rd hour." Azira stared at her. "I have been watching you disappear for over a year," Thessaly said simply. "I am sorry I did not say something sooner. I told myself it was not my place." A brief, complicated expression crossed the elder's face. "I was wrong about that." "I'll be all right," Azira said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know you will," Thessaly said. And there was no doubt in it, no careful reassurance. Just the flat certainty of a woman who had seen enough to know the difference between someone falling apart and someone stepping into their own. Azira nodded, once simple the way you acknowledge something true. And she walked into the forest. Sarus Fox did not notice his mate was gone until the following morning. He was not proud of this. Later, much later, in the particular brutality of honest self-examination, he would return to this fact again and again, not as a wound to pick at, but as a fixed point of evidence about the man he had been. A man whose mate had walked out of the most important gathering of his political year, and he had not noticed until the seat beside him at breakfast was empty. He had slept well that night. That was perhaps the most damning detail of all. He had come to bed, noted that Azira was not yet there, assumed she had taken the guest room as she sometimes did when court gatherings ran late and she didn't want to disturb him. A consideration that he now understood had always moved in one direction, hers toward his comfort, never the reverse, and had fallen asleep without concern. In the morning, Beta Commander Hades Vane stood in the doorway of Saras's council chamber, with the expression of a man carrying information he would rather not be carrying. "Where is she?" Saras said. Not a question. The flat declarative of a man who has already, somewhere below conscious thought, begun to understand that the answer is not going to be simple. "She left last night, my king." Hades' voice was carefully neutral. Sometime between the end of the dinner and the morning watch, she took one bag, left the seal ring. Saras sat very still. "The seal ring," he repeated. "On the dressing table, with the formal jewelry." The silence in the room was different from the silence at the dinner table the previous evening. That silence had been shared, 43 wolves feeling the same wrongness at the same moment. This silence was entirely his. The particular quality of air that fills a space when a person begins to realize that what they are experiencing is not an emergency to be resolved, but a consequence to be understood. He reached for the mate bond the way you reach for something in the dark that you know the position of by memory, automatically, without looking, with the confidence of absolute familiarity. His hand found nothing. Not the warmth he expected. Not the constant low hum of connection that had been the background frequency of his entire existence for 3 years, so consistent that he had stopped perceiving it the way you stop hearing a clock once it has been ticking in your room long enough. It was gone, not broken, not the cold death sever that would have sent him to his knees with grief, but sealed away, dormant, like a fire that had not been extinguished but had been banked so deep under ash and distance that no heat reached the surface. His wolf, which had been restless and ill-tempered for weeks in ways he had been too occupied to examine closely, rose up inside him with a sound that was not quite a howl and not quite a roar but contained elements of both. "Mate gone, find her now." Saras pressed his hand flat against his sternum, as if pressure could bring back what absence had taken. His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone gold, fully, completely gold without his permission, the wolf too close to the surface to be masked. "How long ago?" he asked Hades. "We believe sometime after the 3rd hour, my king, the forest path. Elder Thessaly saw her leave." Saras's head came up. Thessaly saw her leave and said nothing. Hades' expression did not shift, apparently not. There was something in the beta's voice that Saras recognized, even through the rising alarm of his wolf, as the specific careful flatness of a loyal man who had an opinion he was not going to offer unless asked, and who was not sure it would be welcome if he did. "Say what you're thinking, Hades," Saras said. The beta was quiet for a full 3 seconds. "I don't believe Elder Thessaly's silence was an oversight, my king." The words landed with a precision that Saras was not ready for, which told him something he would examine much later. That somewhere in his chest, below the alpha authority and the practice competence and the performance of leadership that had been his entire identity since he was 17 years old, there was a part of him that had already known something like this was coming. A part that had noticed, at some buried level, the way Azira had grown quieter over the past year. The way her mornings had changed. The way she sometimes looked at him, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with a kind of tired patience that he had never let himself look at directly because looking at it directly would have required him to ask a question he was not ready to answer. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because you stopped seeing me, and I have been waiting for you to notice." He didn't move for a long time. Then he stood, squared his shoulders, and said, "Set up a search grid. 6 trackers north and east first then." Saras, Hades used his name, not his title. The beta used his name perhaps 3 times a year, and each time it was a signal. I am speaking to you as your friend now, not your soldier. If you send trackers after her, you will confirm every reason she had to leave. Sarah stopped. She is not lost, Hades said quietly. She is not in danger. She left on purpose with planning in the middle of the night with one bag. That is not a woman who needs to be found. That is a woman who made a decision. A pause. The question is why she made it, and I think, my king, that you already know the answer to that. You just haven't let yourself look at it yet. Sarah sat back down. The chair felt different, heavier. Or perhaps he was the one who felt heavier, and the chair was simply receiving the weight honestly in a way that the rest of his life had stopped doing. He thought about the dinner, the moment, the words that had come out of his mouth, nobody particularly important, and the half-second after, when he had registered that something was wrong but could not identify what, because the wrongness was not external. It was in him, in the specific gap between what was true about Azira and what he had said. The gap between who she was and how he had described her. The gap between the Luna of Vordenmoor, his mate, the woman the moon goddess had chosen for him, and nobody particularly important. He had said that. He had said it in front of 43 wolves and an Interpack Council evaluator, and he had said it not with cruelty, which would at least have had the dignity of intention, but with the careless ease of a man who had become so accustomed to a person's presence that he no longer thought about it at all. His wolf lay down inside him, not in defeat, in the particular stillness that came right before grief, when the body was gathering itself for what was coming. She left the seal ring, Sarah said. His voice came out strange, stripped of its usual authority, as if it had no idea what to carry now that the command structure underneath it had just revealed itself to be hollow in a way he hadn't examined before. Yes, Hades said. She left the seal ring, and I didn't notice she was gone until morning. Hades said nothing. Sometimes the most honest thing a friend can do is stay quiet and let the truth do its own work. Sarah stared at the wall of his council chamber, where a painted map of Vordenmoor's territory occupied the full length of the stone. Every border marked, every settlement noted, every water source and forest path and alliance boundary rendered in careful detail. He had spent years studying this map. He knew every line of it. He realized, sitting in the silence of that room, that he could not have told you what color Azira's eyes were when she was happy versus when she was trying not to show that she was hurt. He could not have told you the last time he had asked her what she was thinking. He could not have told you the last thing she had said to him that was not operational, not pack management, not the functional communication of two people occupying the same space. He could not remember the last time she had laughed near him, really laughed, and he had paid enough attention to hear it. He had not been present in his own marriage, and he had not noticed until it walked out the door. The village of Grayville sat at the junction of 3 territories, far enough from any single alpha's seat of power that it had developed the specific character of places that belonged to everyone and no one, tolerant, practical, and deeply uninterested in political drama that didn't affect the price of trade goods. Azira arrived on the morning of the 3rd day, having run the first night in wolf form. That had been its own kind of reckoning. She had shifted in the deep forest 2 hours after leaving the pack house. Her first fully voluntary shift in almost a year, she realized with a start, because at Vordenmoor the shift had become something she did in service of pack events or formal runs with other wolves, never simply because she needed to run, needed to be in her own animal body, and move through the world at the speed and scale that her wolf self demanded. The shift came like a returning, bones realigning with a sound like the world resettling, fur surfacing through skin, the forest suddenly enormous and precise, every sound separate and identifiable, every scent a complete story. She was gray and silver in wolf form, lighter than most female wolves her size, built for long distances rather than power. She had always been fast. In Thornwood, before she had ever heard of Sarah's Fox or Vordenmoor, she had been the pack's best distance runner. She ran for 6 hours without stopping. Her wolf did not whine for the mate she had left behind. Her wolf ran, and in the running, Azira understood something she could not have arrived at through thinking alone. She was still whole. The bond was dormant, the pack house was behind her, the role of Luna was sitting on a dressing table next to a seal ring, and she was still here, still herself, not broken, not diminished, simply moving. By the time she shifted back and dressed at the forest's edge, she was 10 miles from Vordenmoor, and the sky was beginning to gray toward dawn. She walked the rest of the way to Greyville on 2 feet. The village gave her a room at the Crossroads Inn on the strength of 2 silver coins and no questions asked, which was exactly the transaction she needed. The innkeeper, a wide-shouldered wolf woman named Berta, looked her up and down once with the assessing eye of someone who had seen every variety of wolf passing through a neutral territory, identified her as neither threat nor troublemaker, and handed her a key without ceremony. The room was small, clean, a narrow bed, a south-facing window, a hook on the wall for a cloak. It was the most freedom she had felt in 2 years. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, she reviewed her situation with the same methodical attention she had applied to pack management for 3 years, only this time the subject was herself. What she had: training in pack administration, historical documentation, territorial dispute analysis, and interwolf mediation that most formally educated pack administrators would have needed 10 years of schooling to acquire, and that she had built through 3 years of necessity, quietly, without anyone to teach her, simply because the work needed doing, and she was the one available to do it. What she had: a reputation, though she was not yet sure what shape that reputation had taken in the wider wolf world, or whether it was attached to the name Azira Fox or Azira Aran, or simply to the figure of Vordenmoor's invisible Luna. What she had: enough silver to last 3 months without income. What she had: a mind, her own judgment, and the specific competence of someone who has spent years solving other people's problems, and has quietly become excellent at it. 2 days after she arrived in Greyville, a territorial merchant named Corvin Hest knocked on the inn-room door. He had, he said, a problem, a conflict between his trade consortium and a neighboring pack over a forest pathway that both sides claimed the right to use. His consortium had tried 2 mediators already. Both had taken sides and made things worse. Someone at the village market had told him there was a wolf staying at the crossroads and who used to be a Luna, and might know something about how to resolve land disputes between packs. Azira looked at him over her cup of tea. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me everything. Start with the part both sides agree on and work forward from there." She had the dispute's core resolved within 3 days. Not just the surface conflict, the path itself, but the underlying tension about resource access and territorial recognition that had been driving the path dispute as a proxy for a deeper grievance. Both parties, she noted, had needed to feel heard more than they had needed to win. She had given them both that, structured the agreement around mutual acknowledgement rather than winner-loser mechanics, and drafted the terms in language that neither side could later misread as a concession they hadn't intended to make. Corvin Hest paid her in full, told every consortium member he knew, and left looking like a man who had expected to receive a bandage and had instead received surgery. Within 10 days, she had 4 more cases. Within a month, she had a waiting list. She was not performing the role of Luna. She was not holding together someone else's world with invisible threads. She was doing the work on her own terms, for her own name, at her own pace, and the wolves who came to her came because they had heard she was good, not because she occupied a position they needed to respect. For the first time in 3 years, she existed as the subject of her own life, rather than the supporting structure of someone else's. She did not let herself think about the bond, not directly. It was there, sealed beneath distance and will, cold and quiet, and she could feel it in the way you feel an old injury on the days when rain is coming. A reminder, not a pull. Not yet. Sarah's Fox had been raised to understand that an alpha king was not permitted the luxury of public disintegration. His father, the previous alpha king of Vordenmoor, had been a man of absolute self-possession. Even when Sarah's mother had died, when Saras was 11, from the sickness that took 3 wolves that winter. His father had sat at the head of the table the following morning and conducted business with the composed authority of a man in complete command of himself, and young Saras had watched and understood without being told. You do not fall apart in front of your pack. He had honored that lesson his entire adult life. He was violating it now, and he knew it, and he could not seem to stop. It began with the small failures, meetings where he lost the thread of what was being discussed and had to ask Hades to repeat things, which he had never needed before. Morning runs where his wolf refused to settle into the easy loping rhythm of a king patrolling his territory, and instead pulled hard at the edges of the border, toward the north and east, where the forest path had gone cold and the bond lay silent as ash. 3 consecutive nights where he did not sleep past the 2nd hour, lying in the dark with his hand pressed to his sternum, as if checking whether a fire was still burning. The pack noticed. Wolves always notice, because the alpha's emotional frequency travels through the pack bond like sound through water. They could not have told you in words what they were sensing, but the atmosphere of Vordenmoor's pack house changed in those weeks, quieter, more careful, the way people move around someone who is carrying something heavy and trying not to show it. Elder Thessaly had not come to the council meeting since the night of the dinner. On the morning of the 6th day, Saras knocked on the door of her quarters. She opened it before he could knock twice, as if she had been expecting him. You could have stopped her, he said, not accusation, information, the flat delivery of a man who is still processing facts. Yes, Thessaly said. She did not pretend otherwise. I could have raised the alarm and she would have been brought back, and every reason she had to leave would still be sitting inside her, only now she would also have lost the one thing she still had, which was the ability to choose. Saras said nothing. Come in, she said. You look like something the forest found. He sat in the narrow chair by her fire, which was the least Alpha King posture he had occupied in years, and Thessaly sat across from him, and looked at him with the particular patience of a very old wolf who has run out of any motivation to soften the truth. What did I do wrong? He asked. The words came out different than he expected, not the tactical question of a man seeking information to correct a problem, the raw, unguarded question of someone who genuinely did not know. Thessaly was quiet for a moment. You did the most ordinary wrong thing, she said finally. You stopped choosing her, not suddenly. Slowly, the way people stop doing most things gradually, without decision, by simply not doing it enough until the habit was lost. She folded her hands. She loved you enough to hold everything together while you weren't looking, and she was good enough at it that you never had to see how much she was carrying. Which meant you never had the information you needed to understand what was happening, until it walked out the door. I called her nobody important, Saras said. The words tasted like something he had accidentally eaten and could not put back. You did. I didn't, he stopped, started again. I wasn't trying to. I know, Thessaly said. That's not better, Saras. That's worse. A man who calls his mate nobody important out of cruelty at least understands what he's doing. You did it because you had stopped thinking about her at all, because she had become so much a part of the background of your life that you didn't see her the way you see the people you actively value. She let that land. She told a room full of 43 wolves that your mate had become wallpaper in her own home. He sat with that for a long time. What do I do? He asked. Thessaly looked at him for a moment. First, you understand something important, she said. She is not a lost territory to be recovered. She is not a problem in your border management. She is a person who made a decision, and the only thing worth doing now is the long work of becoming someone worth reconsidering. And that work, she paused, her voice gentling slightly without losing its directness, does not begin with finding her and apologizing. It begins with you, alone, honestly examining what you became in that marriage and why. She stood, which was a signal he recognized. The conversation was over. She will be where she should be, Thessaly said, moving toward the door. She always ends up where she should be. The question is whether you will be someone she wants nearby when she gets there. Saras left the old wolf's quarters and stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he walked to the great hall, sat down at the head of the empty ceremonial table, and began, alone, without performance, without the careful competence that had been his armor for 20 years, to look at his own life honestly for the first time in as long as he could remember. It took several hours. By the end of it, he had cried twice, which surprised him, and understood several things about himself that he was not proud of, which did not surprise him at all. He did not send trackers. He did not ride north. He did not write a letter composed to extract forgiveness or produce a specific response. He went to his council chamber and began reviewing every decision, every policy, every structural arrangement in Vordenmoor that Azira had touched, trying to see what she had seen, trying to understand the pack through her eyes. It took him 3 days to realize how much she had been doing. It took him 5 more to understand how differently Vordenmoor felt without her doing it. 2 months after Azira left Vordenmoor, a man came to Greyville. He came quietly, on a gray morning when the autumn was just beginning to put color in the trees, and he came without sigil or escort, which was the kind of arrival that only very powerful wolves or very careful ones could manage convincingly. He found her at the Crossroads Inn, where she was reviewing the terms of a contested pack inheritance on behalf of a Greyville-adjacent wolf family. And he sat down at the opposite end of the table and waited without speaking until she had finished the document she was reading. Edric Salmond, she said, without looking up. She had recognized him by the quality of his stillness, which was distinctive. Interpack Council, neutral delegation head. "You remembered me," he said. "I reviewed your file before the dinner." She set the document down and looked at him directly. "You were at the table when the Alpha King introduced me as nobody important." "I was," Edric said. Something in his face acknowledged this without hiding from it. "Then you know who I am," she said, "or who I was." "I know who you are," he said. "That's why I'm here." He folded his hands on the table with the unhurried ease of a man who has learned to let silence do its own work. "I've spent the last 2 months asking questions about Azira Arin, your name before Vordenmoor, because the work you did at that pack is not documented under the name Fox, since apparently none of it was formally documented at all." A slight quality of controlled anger in that quickly reigned in. "What I found is this. In 3 years, you prevented 4 territorial disputes from becoming open conflicts, restructured Vordenmoor's internal social management so thoroughly that they will benefit from it for years without knowing why, and managed the political architecture of every formal gathering the pack hosted with a level of sophistication that most trained council mediators would struggle to match." Azira looked at him steadily. She did not perform modesty, and she did not perform pride. She simply waited for the part that came next. "The Interpack Council has an opening," Edric said. "A formal seat, conflict resolution and pack mediation, neutral territory. It requires the kind of political reading you demonstrated in Greyville 5 times in the last 6 weeks, and the kind of instinctive architecture you built in Vordenmoor without anyone asking you to." He held her gaze. "I am here to offer you the position, not because of your history as a Luna, because of what you are capable of independent of that history." Azira sat with the offer for a moment. The wolf in her chest turned slowly, examining the shape of the thing. "The council would have concerns," she said. "My status with Vordenmoor is unresolved." "Your status with Vordenmoor is your business," Edric said flatly. "The council's interest is in your skill, which is not in question. If there are traditionalists who try to make your marital situation into an obstacle to your appointment, that is their problem to manage, not yours to apologize for." She looked at him with a new quality of attention. "You've already had this argument inside the council, haven't you?" The corner of his mouth moved, several times. "And won it." "I rarely argue something I can't win," he said. Azira was quiet for a moment. Outside the inn window, Greyville went about its morning, traders moving through the market square. A pair of young wolves racing along the lane in wolf form before someone old enough to care about propriety called them back to 2 legs, the smell of fresh bread from the baker 2 doors down. She had built something here. Small, clean, entirely hers. She was not invisible in Grayville. She was the woman at the crossroads and who could see through disputes to their roots, whose name got passed between packs the way useful information gets passed, with a specific kind of grateful care, because not many people like this existed, and those who did were worth keeping track of. She was honest enough to admit, something she had not expected to be when she left Vordenmoor with one bag and her mother's bracelet, genuinely happy, not the cautious, managed happiness of a woman being careful not to want too much. The open, uncertain, daily happiness of a person living in her own life. "I'll need to think about it," she told Edric. "Take the time you need," he said. He pushed a folded document across the table, the formal terms she assumed. "I would like your answer within the month. The council meets at the autumn equinox and I want you at the table." He rose to leave. "Salmond," she said. He paused. "Why did you come yourself?" she asked. "The council could have sent a messenger." Edric looked at her for a moment. "Because the council sends messengers for ordinary appointments," he said, "and because anyone who has spent 3 years being invisible and still managed to reshape everything around them without asking for credit deserves to have someone look them in the eye when they offer them what they're owed." He nodded once, precise and genuine. "Think about it." He walked out. Azira sat at the table for a long time after he left, the autumn light moving across the inn's wooden floor, the sounds of Grayville going about its business around her. Her wolf was utterly quiet, not dormant, present, alert, listening, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment to settle fully into the body and territory of this new life, and now that the moment had arrived, there was nothing left to resist. She unfolded Edric's document and began to read. The letter arrived at Vordenmoor 7 weeks after Azira had left. It was not to Saras. It was to Elder Thessaly, which was a detail that landed with its own precise weight when Hades brought it to Saras's council chamber. He looked at the addressed line for a moment, then set it beside Thessaly's tea service, which was already on the council table because the old elder attended every morning meeting now with a punctuality that had not always been her custom. She arrived, read the letter, and put it quietly in her pocket without comment. At the end of the meeting, as the others filed out, she set it on the table in front of Saras and left the room. He read it 3 times. It was not personal, not written to him, not even written about him. It was a brief, businesslike note from Azira to Thessaly informing the elder that she had accepted a position on the Interpack Council's conflict resolution panel, that she was well and established in Grayville, and that she intended to formally request a legal clarification of her status from the Council's civil division, so that neither Vordenmoor nor she herself would remain in ambiguity indefinitely. 2 sentences near the end stayed with him. "I hope the pack is well. I hope that what I tried to build for Vordenmoor proves durable enough to hold without me." No blame in it. No performance of her own pain. Just the note of someone who had genuinely cared about the wolves in her charge and was, in the middle of rebuilding her entire life, still thinking about whether the things she had built for them were solid enough to last. Sarah set the letter down. He had been doing something in the 7 weeks since she left that he had never deliberately done before in his adult life. He had been paying attention. Not the performative attention of a public leader who listens as part of managing impressions, but the uncomfortable, humbling attention of a man who is trying to understand what he has consistently failed to see. He had spent a week just watching how his pack functioned. Really watching. Not as the alpha whose presence immediately altered every interaction, but from behind the ordinary business of the place. He had sat in the kitchen in the early mornings on the pretense of reviewing supply records and listened to how the staff talked about each other, how the cook Myra managed conflicts between her helpers, how young Fett the kitchen boy had recently begun organizing the storage shelves in a more sensible pattern, and been proud of it in the quiet way of someone who expects no acknowledgement. He had walked the residential corridors during the afternoon hour when wolves gathered informally, and observed how people checked on each other, how old Meister Edwin navigated the written briefs that someone had started quietly providing before meetings, how young Sale Torin moved through the archive rooms with a focused confidence, he had not had 6 months ago. He had understood, sitting in the kitchen one morning with a mug of tea and the weight of 7 weeks of honest self-examination pressing on his chest, that he had been the alpha of Vordenmoor and Azira had been its heart. And he had confused those two things, had thought that being the power of a place and being its center were the same thing. They were not. He had begun making changes, slowly, without fanfare, in the way that things built to last are always built, without announcing themselves. He had called Meister Edwin into his private chamber and acknowledged, simply, directly, without making it into a larger moment than it needed to be, that he had noticed the written brief system that someone had put in place, and that he had also noticed that Edwin's hearing had been declining. He told the old wolf that it was not a weakness. He told him that it would never be used against him. He told him that Vordenmoor needed its memory, and Edwin was still the best keeper of it in the territory, and that adapting how information was delivered did not diminish that. Edwin had not cried. He had sat very still for a moment, in the manner of a wolf receiving something he had not let himself ask for, and then said, "Thank you, my king," in a voice that Sarris understood carried a great deal more than those 3 words could hold. He had done this kind of thing, in different forms, 12 more times over the following weeks. Each time it was a small act. Each time it cost him nothing but attention and deliberateness. Each time he understood a little more clearly what Azira had been doing for 3 years, and why it mattered in ways that no pack strategy document could fully measure. He had not written to her, not because he had nothing to say. He had more to say than he had ever had in his life, probably, but because he was not yet the person who could say it correctly. Writing to her now, in week 7, would be the act of a man who had recently been frightened into paying attention and wanted credit for it. He needed to be something more than that before he could deserve her attention in return. He had sent one thing, not to her directly. He had heard, through Hades who had heard through channels that Sarris did not examine too carefully, that Azira's formal appointment to the Interpack Council was being complicated by 3 council members who were uncomfortable with the ambiguity of her current status. A Luna who had neither formally resigned nor been formally rejected, which existed in a legal gray space that traditionalists preferred to resolve before giving someone like her a visible seat. Sarris had thought about this for one night. In the morning, he had gone to the Interpack Civil Division and formally submitted a declaration of mutual separation, not a rejection of the mate bond, which was irrevocable, but a legal recognition that Azira Aran retained full and independent standing as a wolf of no single pack, owed full protections as a former Luna and a bonded mate, but was under no legal obligation to Vordenmoor, and under no legal ambiguity with respect to her independence. He did not tell Azira he had done this. He did not send a message saying, "Look at what I am becoming." He submitted the document, returned to Vordenmoor, and said nothing. 3 weeks later, Hades informed him that the council appointment had been confirmed without further delay. Sarris sat with this information in the privacy of his own chambers, not the satisfaction of a man who has produced a desired result, but something quieter and less comfortable, the feeling of a person taking the first real step of a very long journey and understanding, in that first step, how far they have to go. He pressed his hand to his chest where the bond lay quiet and cold, and for the first time since she left, he did not press against it with urgency. He simply acknowledged it. It was there. She was there, and he had work to do before anything else could be real. He would do the work. The message came to Azira through Elder Thessaly, 3 months after the dinner. It was simple, 4 lines. No performance, no architecture of language designed to extract a specific response. I am not asking you to return. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking whether you would be willing to meet in neutral territory on terms entirely of your choosing. I have things to say that I should have said years ago. Whether you want to hear them is your decision. See. She sat with it for 4 days. Her wolf circled the letter the way a wolf circles something it has found in the forest and is not yet sure whether to trust. The bond, dormant for 3 months, did not pull at her with the desperation it had in the first terrible weeks. It was simply present, a quiet awareness, like knowing a river is on the other side of a hill without being able to hear it. She wrote to Gideon, Hades' Vane, Ceres's beta, who had been the one person at Vordenmoor she had always trusted to tell her the truth without packaging it for palatability. Is the change real, she wrote, or is this a man who has been frightened into attention and wants recognition for waking up? Hades' reply took 2 days and was the most honest thing he had ever written to her. I have known Ceres for 22 years. I have seen him fight battles I thought would break him and come through with the seams showing but the bones intact. I have never seen him break himself on purpose. He has been doing exactly that for 3 months. The man who said those words at the dinner and the man sitting in your old chair every morning reviewing pack correspondence and trying to understand what he missed, those are not the same man. I do not know what that means for you, and I would not presume to suggest, but you asked whether it was real. It is real. Whether real is enough is a question only you can answer. She read it twice, put it in the same place she kept Edric Salmon's council appointment letter and the sea green curtains from her old room in Thornwood, the things she kept because they were true. She chose the meeting place, a meadow at the junction of the old forest paths, 2 hours from Greyville, in territory that belonged to no pack. She chose a morning in late autumn when the light came in low and clear, and the frost was on the grass but the sky was open. She chose ordinary. On purpose, deliberately, because whatever this conversation was, it needed to happen in a place without ceremony. She arrived first. This surprised her. She had assumed he would arrive before her, because that was what alphas did, and because she had half expected to find him already present when she emerged from the tree line, composing himself in that particular alpha king way he had always had of inhabiting a space with authority before anyone else arrived. But the meadow was empty, and she stood in the frost-silvered grass for 10 minutes with her wolf calm and attentive beside her, listening to the forest. She heard him coming before she saw him, not the crashing sound of a man in a hurry, the careful, measured sound of someone trying very deliberately not to approach too fast. He emerged from the opposite tree line alone. No beta, no escort. He wore plain traveling clothes, no sigil, no formal rank markings. He looked, she noticed this before she had prepared herself for the noticing, tired. Not the exhaustion of sleeplessness, though that might be part of it. The deeper tiredness of a person who has been doing hard internal work for an extended period of time and is carrying the weight of what they've found. He stopped 30 feet away. They looked at each other across the morning meadow. Her wolf recognized him. That was unavoidable. 3 years of bonded closeness written into the animal part of her, which did not have opinions about right and wrong, only about presence and absence, and which experienced his presence now as something complicated and significant and painfully familiar. The bond in her chest pulsed once, warm and brief, like a buried coal touched by a single breath of air. She held it still. She walked toward him, unhurried. He waited and let her come to him at her own pace, which told her more than any word could have. They walked, not touching, through the frost-stiff grass while the morning light grew around them, and she said what she had needed to say for 3 years, and he listened. She told him about the morning he had walked past her in the library like furniture. She told him about the letter she had written to her dead mother, because she had needed to put the pain somewhere. She told him about the people she had protected and managed and held together at Vordenmoor, Meister Edwin, young Sale, old Berta in the kitchens who had been afraid to tell anyone her bones were failing her, not to establish a debt or a list of grievances, but because she needed him to understand that when he stopped seeing her, he also stopped seeing the entire invisible architecture of care that had been holding his pack together. I was the heart of your home, she said, and you treated me like part of the walls. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Not cruelly. That's the part that made it so lonely. If you had been cruel, I could have been angry. You were simply absent. You stopped choosing me so gradually that I don't think you noticed it was a choice. Ceres said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had none of the commanding resonance she had spent 3 years being both proud of and exhausted by. It was just a man's voice, quiet and stripped of anything it wasn't. I reviewed everything you built at Vordenmoor after you left, he said. Every system, every arrangement, every decision you had quietly shaped over 3 years. It took me 3 days to catalog it, and then 5 more to understand what it meant that I had benefited from every part of it without knowing it existed. He looked at her directly. You built a functioning, thriving pack community, and I spent 3 years walking through it as if it had grown there naturally, like grass. He exhaled. I don't know when I stopped seeing you specifically, he continued. I've tried to find the moment and I can't, which is the point, I think. It didn't happen in a moment. It happened in 100 small non-decisions. Every morning I didn't ask how you were. Every evening I was so occupied with being the alpha king that I forgot to be your mate. Every time I accepted the coffee you made me the way you made it for me and said nothing. His jaw tightened briefly. I became the most important person in my own life, and I let you become maintenance. A long silence. The seal ring, she said. I know. You noticed the seal ring before you noticed I was gone. Yes, he said, not flinching from it, and I have been sitting with that fact every day since I found out, because that is the clearest possible measurement of how upside down my priorities had become. He held her gaze. I am ashamed of it. I am not telling you this to produce forgiveness. I am telling you because I think you deserve accurate information about what actually happened. Azira looked at him for a long time. He had changed. She could see it not in any single thing but in the aggregate of a dozen small things, the quality of his attention, which was present in a way it had not been for 2 years. The way he was standing, which was not the performed ease of an alpha managing an interaction, but the uncertain openness of a person genuinely not sure how this ends and not trying to control the outcome. The way he had arrived at this meadow alone and on foot and in plain clothes. I've built something in Greyville, she said, and on the council, a life that's mine on my terms with my name on it. I am not going to dismantle it. I know, he said immediately. I'm not asking you to. If there is any future between us, and I am not saying there is, Saris, because I don't know yet, it will not look like what we had before. I will not go back to Vordenmoor and be the Luna who holds everything together while the Alpha King is busy being important. I will not do that again. I know, he said again. My work comes with me, she continued. My independence comes with me. My seat on the council, my casework, my Greyville connections. If we rebuild anything, it is built around 2 whole lives intersecting, not one life being swallowed by the other. Yes, he said. It was not a negotiating answer. It was a man agreeing to something because he understood, down to the bone, why it was right. She looked at the meadow around them, the frost on the grass, the morning light angling through the bare-limbed trees at the edge of the clearing, a hawk somewhere above them, circling, its call clean and precise in the cold air. I'm not ready to decide anything today, she said. I know, he said, and for the first time in that meadow, a very small, very careful thing moved in the corner of his expression. Not pressure. The opposite, something that looked like a man releasing the grip on something he had been holding too tightly for too long. I am asking for nothing except this. Let me show you who I am becoming. Not in words, in time, in showing up. She held the moment. Same time next week, she said, here. I'll be here, he said. They stood in the frost-white meadow for another quiet minute. Neither of them reached for the other. They were not at that point yet, and they both knew it. But something in the air between them was different from how it had been at the beginning of the morning, not warmer exactly, but less sealed. As if a window somewhere in a sealed room had been opened just enough to let a single thread of air through. It was a beginning. The first month of meetings taught Saris things about himself that no battle or alliance or council of war had ever managed to teach him. He had always understood leadership in the language of action, decisions, strategies, commands given and received, the architecture of power across a territory. He understood now, sitting across from Azira in a frost-cold meadow or walking beside her along the forest paths of neutral ground, that the most important things a person does for the people they love are almost never the large, visible actions. They are the 10,000 small moments of genuine attention. The cup of tea brought without being asked, and without expectation of acknowledgement. The question asked not to produce a useful answer, but because you genuinely want to know what the other person thinks. The act of remembering something small, a preference, a fear, a dream they mentioned once and you could have forgotten, and letting them see that you remembered. He had been a very good alpha. He had been a very poor partner. These two things could be true simultaneously, and the work of becoming better at the second was entirely separate from the competence he had in the first. Every week he came to the meadow, and every week Azira came to the meadow, and they talked with the specific honesty of two people who had lost the cover story they used to hide behind the smooth performance of a mated pair, and were now speaking to each other without it. In the second month, she let him come to Grayville. Not to her home, not yet, but to the town, to the crossroads inn where she sometimes worked mornings, to the market square where she was known and greeted by name, to the mediation sessions where he sat quietly in the back and watched her work with a quality of attention that she noticed was different from the attention she remembered. He was actually watching, not managing, not strategizing, watching the way you watch someone you want to understand. He watched her navigate a bitterly contested dispute between two neighboring wolf families over an ancestral hunting ground. He watched her do the thing she had always done. See the real wound underneath the stated grievance. Understand what each side actually needed versus what they were asking for. Create the conditions for both parties to feel heard before she introduced the terms of a resolution. He watched her remember the name of every person in the room, use those names precisely and warmly throughout the session, and walk out of the building 2 hours later with both parties speaking to each other for the first time in 3 years. Afterward, he waited for her outside. "You were extraordinary in there," he said, not the flattery of a man trying to produce a particular response. The plain statement of someone who had been paying attention and found what he saw genuinely remarkable. She looked at him for a moment. "You mean that?" she said. "Every word," he said. "I spent years benefiting from everything you could do and never once stopping to acknowledge what it was. I'm trying to learn how to actually see it now." He held her gaze. "You have a gift, Azira, not just skill, a gift for understanding what people need before they know how to ask. It is one of the most valuable things I have ever seen in any wolf, in any council, in any capacity, and I treated it like housekeeping." She did not perform a response. She stood with the words for a moment, let them actually land. Then she said, "Come to Grayville next week. There is a case I want to talk through with you. A border matter involving 2 packs with histories your archive would know better than anyone else's." It was not a reconciliation. It was not a declaration. It was the opening of a door, small, careful, deliberately unhurried, and Saris understood precisely what it was and did not try to turn it into something larger. "I'll come," he said. In the 3rd month, after a particularly long mediation session that had spilled from afternoon into evening, they sat together at the inn's common table with food between them and talked for 3 hours about nothing related to the case. His relationship with his father, the weight of a legacy built on a man you loved and feared in equal measure, the specific loneliness of power, which everyone wanted but which separated you from ordinary life in ways that no one warned you about before you took it on. Her childhood moving between packs after her mother died. The way she had learned to make herself useful everywhere she went because useful was the only currency she was sure of. The way that skill, being indispensable to other people's lives, had eventually become both her greatest strength and the mechanism of her own disappearance. "You made yourself so essential to me that I stopped seeing you as separate." Saris said, "I know that is not an excuse, but I want you to know I understand now what happened, how the dynamic worked. How my blindness and your own pattern of making yourself invisible fit together and produced 3 years of you quietly vanishing inside your own marriage." Azira looked at him steadily. "I spent so much time holding everything together that I forgot to ask whether anyone was holding me," she said. He nodded. "I should have been," he said. "I should have been asking that question every day." They were quiet together for a moment. Outside the inn window, the winter night pressed close and cold against the glass, and inside the light was warm and the table was small, and the distance between them was less than it had been in months. "I wrote a letter to my mother 6 months before I left," Azira said. "She has been gone for years, so it went in the fire, but I wrote her about you, about how tired I was of being invisible." She looked at the table between them. "I told her I didn't know if the man who crossed a room in 12 steps to reach me was still inside the Alpha King somewhere." A pause. "Is he," she asked, "not vulnerable in the unguarded way, with the specific, clear-eyed quality of a woman who wanted true information and was not afraid of it?" Saras held the question for a long moment. "I think he got buried," he said. "Under the king, under the legacy, under the work of being what my father expected and what the pack needed and what the territory required. I think I forgot that none of those things were me, that there was a man under the role who had a mate he loved, and that loving her meant choosing her every day, not assuming the moon goddess's choice did the choosing for him." He looked at her. "He is still there. I am sure of him for the first time in a long time. And I would like very much to spend the rest of my life proving that." The inn fire crackled. The winter wind moved through the eaves. Somewhere in the village, a wolf called to her cubs to come inside, and her voice was ordinary and warm and entirely unconcerned with the weight of the world. Azira reached across the small table and placed her hand over his. She did not speak. He did not speak. The touch was simple and deliberate, and it said everything that the last 4 months had been slowly, carefully, honestly building toward, not an ending, not an arrival, but the genuine beginning of something that had never quite existed between them before. 2 whole people, clear-eyed and scarred and changed, choosing each other with full knowledge of what choosing meant. The bond woke. Not dramatically, not the snapping, floor-shifting force of 3 years ago at the Ashthorn summit. Gently, like ice releasing from the edges of a river in the first days of spring, like something that had been sealed for its own protection slowly, cautiously testing the warmth to see if it was real. It was real. Azira felt it move through her chest, warm and tentative and unmistakably alive. And her wolf, which had been so still for so many months, moved in her chest like a wolf that had been lying with its chin on its paws for a long time, and had just lifted its head. She left her hand where it was. The following spring, at the Interpack Council's formal meeting, a motion was presented to formally recognize the partnership structure between 2 wolves of different standing, an Alpha King and a council mediator, as a mutually independent and fully equal arrangement, with neither party's authority subordinate to the others and both parties' roles formally acknowledged in pack law. The motion was authored by Azira Arin Fox, co-signed by Alpha King Saras Fox. It passed. Not unanimously. There were traditionalists who found the structure unprecedented, which it was. Edric Salmond, who had been watching both of them for a year with his pale gray eyes and his specific quality of absolute stillness, said during the council debate that the motion was not only appropriate but necessary, that the concept of a Luna as a functional subordinate to her Alpha was a historical convenience that had produced exactly the kind of damage that this case had made visible, and that the wolf world would be better for having a formal legal framework that recognized something every honest wolf already understood, that the invisible work of holding communities together was not lesser work, it was foundational work, and the people who did it deserved to have their standing reflect that. The motion passed. That summer, Azira kept her house in Greyville. She kept her seat on the council. She kept her casework and her independence and the specific early morning silence she had always needed, which Saras now protected without being asked, because he had learned that this was not a preference to accommodate but a person to see. She also, on the weeks when the council was not in session, spent long evenings at Vordenmoor, where she was not the Luna managing invisible threads but a wolf who had been important to this place, and who chose to be present in it on her own terms. Meister Edwin made her tea the way she took it when she arrived, without being asked. Young Sale brought her the archived documents she had always found interesting, because he had learned her reading patterns in 3 years and remembered them still. The kitchen staff greeted her by name, warmly, with none of the careful deference that pack hierarchy usually produced, and that she had always found lonely, just genuine, comfortable recognition. You are someone we know. You are someone we are glad to see. Old Elder Thessaly met her one morning in the herb garden, on the same stone bench where she had sat on the night Azira left. You look different, the old wolf said. Better, Azira asked. Thessaly tilted her head, considering. Complete, she said finally, like a wolf who has finished a long run and is standing still on purpose, rather than standing still because she has nowhere to go. Azira sat on the bench beside her. The morning light came through the rosemary in silver-green shafts. Somewhere across the herb garden, a pair of young pack wolves were running the boundary in wolf form. She could hear their paws on the packed earth, light and fast, the sound of animals completely at home in their own bodies and their own territory. The sound of belonging that doesn't require you to make yourself small to earn it. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the morning sit with her. The bond was warm in her chest, not the ache it had been, not the sealed coldness of the months after she left. Something settled and alive, the particular warmth of something real that had been built at the right pace and was, for the first time, resting on a foundation honest enough to hold it. Saras was somewhere in the pack house. She could feel him through the bond, the general, low warmth of his presence, distinct and familiar, and no longer something she had to convince herself to trust. In an hour they were supposed to walk the south border together, something they had started doing in the spring, not as Alpha King and Luna, not as a performance of united authority, but as two wolves who wanted to spend an ordinary morning in the same direction. She would take her time getting there. Thessaly passed her a cup of tea without comment, plain and strong, exactly how she took it. Thank you, Azira said. Said Thessaly, which meant everything. Above the pack house, the summer sky was open and very blue, and the world was still turning in the slow, enormous way it always had, indifferent to the small human dramas being enacted beneath it, but generous enough, when those dramas were honest and hard-won, to offer this. A morning, a garden, the smell of rosemary, and the particular piece of a person who has finally stopped being invisible and learned, at great cost and on their own terms, how to be seen. Some bonds are forged by the moon goddess, but some must be chosen, every day, deliberately, by the people who carry them. The choosing is the bond,